Hello,
Hi, Drew.
this is Drew.
Hi, Drew. This is Randy Harris calling from Raging Randy Entertainment. If you got some time for me, I'd still love to do an interview with you.
Uh, I blocked this out for you, so yep, I'm ready and willing.
Wonderful. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you. Um,
Too, Randy.
all right. Well, so let's go ahead and dive right in then. Obviously, you guys have something higher coming out on May 4th. I know all your fans are excited about that. A couple singles released so far. Southern Belle and House of Cards have both been out to the public already. Is there anything
And
special that
something
you?
higher is actually
Oh, I'm sorry.
something higher than that too. That's
Uh,
been our radio single.
oh, okay, great, great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I must have missed that one being announced then, but I'm glad. So they got three
Oh, no
singles
worries.
out.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there anything specific that you want to, any specific tunes that you want to kind of bring forth to light that have not been released yet?
Well, I guess obviously something higher is out there, and I think Places got released on Relics. I think maybe it was released one of the first ones. Other than that, I'm really partial to Astral Traveler, a song I wrote for Colonel Bruce Hampton, and that's a pretty cool tune. We're pretty excited about it. And also another one that maybe is a bit under the radar is Greg Garrison's Analog. Very, very cool tune. And another tune that he wrote also is it's actually the last tune on the record. The song about California. Really cool. I'm trying to, the name, the title's escaping
Burdened
me.
Heart, right?
Yeah, but thank you. We're not. Yeah, like it's not California, but I
Yeah.
always think of California first, and I forget it's called Burdened Heart. Anyway, so those are some that stand out to me. But yeah, we're pretty pumped that it's finally going to come out. So that's coming right up.
Yeah, I know. I've given it a couple of lit runs through, and I really enjoyed the album. So I think your fans are going to really enjoy it too. Yeah,
Awesome.
Analog is one that I wanted to bring up. That one kind of intrigued me. It kind of is a little bit of a fun tune that kind of breaks up the
Yeah,
album because there's a lot of different themes here. You talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
traveling a lot. You talk about obviously
yeah,
House of Cards has a little bit more of a political pulse to it. So there's
yeah.
a lot of different themes here that I really like. Anyone that you're particularly partial to?
Um, well, I mean, Something Higher is probably my favorite. It's the first tune that we kind of put together, and I had written it on the way back from Telluride one day to Crested Butte, and I went down to there's a lake called Blue Mesa, and I just started walking along the shore, and I just had this idea come into my head to write this song, and so I kind of had it finished, and then we got to the rehearsal, and I felt like, well, it might be cool to have Vince write half of the verses, and so he did, and it became the first tune that we've ever collaborated on
Oh,
in
really?
almost 29 years. Yeah, and so I really love it for that, and I also feel like it kind of encapsulates the theme of the record, which is something higher, and looking for something higher in the world, and in our society these days, because there is so much terrible, crazy stuff going on, and obviously the political scene is really bizarre, and so I think it sets the tone for the record in a lot of ways, and I love the horn section. It's a really fun tune. So I'm really glad that that's the radio single, and that's the title of the album. I'm really happy that kind of developed into that. It was going to be called Places, which is, of course, the first cut on the record. And I was psyched about that, too, because obviously that would have been another title song that I would have gotten. But we were at a photo shoot, and we were standing outside on a break from the photo shoot around Thanksgiving, and we were just talking about it, and it was like, wait a minute, we should just call it Something Higher. And that stuck, and that was it. Because up until that point, it was going to be places, and we were going to have sort of a montage theme on the album cover, you know, like a map and like different places and sort of old timey, and then suddenly the whole thing shifted, and like, oh wow, that's it. And we all agreed that would be the title of the record, and it really makes for some nice merchandising. In many different ways, you know, especially since marijuana is legal in Colorado. Even though that's really not what the song is about, it's not really how I wrote it, but it does lend itself well to the pot industry. So I guess it can be construed as that, but it's really about something different, just to set the record straight.
All right. Yeah, certainly. So yeah, that actually a lot of that leads me into something else I wanted to talk about. You know, Leftover Salmon has never really, you know, tried to stuck with just being bluegrass or just being one genre or another.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like this album even explored some new territories for you guys. You know, I'm not a you know, I don't know every song you guys have ever written, but I'm a longtime fan. And there was a lot of stuff on here that just sounded very new to me. Excuse me, that sets itself apart from the rest of the Leftover Salmon repertoire. How do you keep finding ways to breathe new life into these songs as you've been touring and writing music for 30 plus years? How do you find yourself able to do that?
Well, I think we really got lucky on this record because we didn't really know what kind of a record we were going to make. And in fact, largely, we didn't really have the tunes together until about a month before we recorded. And even once we got in the studio, we really finished a lot of the tunes up. And so, I mean, there wasn't really a concept. It just kind of came together because everybody just kind of started writing. It just sort of became a frenzy. And it was great because everybody was inspired and motivated to come up with something. And this is really the first record where everybody in the band has had something to contribute. Like, especially back in the day, it was mostly Vince and I that wrote all the songs. And then Andy Thorne came along and he started, you know, adding some tunes on, you know, Quite a Hitchhiker and High Country. But now, like, everybody, including our drummer, contributed to this record. And it's really cool. It's very much a collective album. It's not any one band member dominating. It's spread out pretty evenly among all of us. And it's really great that way. And I think we just kind of happened upon it. And it wasn't something planned out. And I think that we all just kind of went with where the muse took us, and it took us in a good direction.
I'd certainly agree with that. And one thing I also noticed there that goes along with the Something Higher theme, there's a lot of really well-placed and epic swells in the music that kind of, you know, push the tunes along and push the listener higher, you know, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like how that turned out. So I'm glad that's awesome that it was a group effort. I guess a lot of times the collaborative effort can be the best route.
For sure. And I think our keyboard player, Eric Deutsch, I think it really had a whole lot to do with the textural aspects and the swells and the builds. And it was just really great. It's our first record that we made with Eric. And even though he doesn't have a song that he wrote on the record, he did help me with places, and he came up with a cool part on that, and so I gave him a credit on that song because it just really made the song happen. And I think in so many ways, Eric just had so much to do with making the record sound the way it did, and also our drummer Alwyn just really, he had some really great rhythms and great approaches to each song that really, you know, brought each song to life in so many ways. And it really enabled the rest of us to really do our thing. And like I said, everybody just had such a great contribution, and it just came together kind of magically. And the studio was cool because it was we went from tape to digital, so we recorded on tape first, which is cool that we have a song called Analog.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
And it was a very cool kind of funky studio in Tucson, which is where I was born. So that was cool. I got to spend my birthday in Tucson for the first time since I left there when I was 3.
Wow.
So that was significant also. But a very cool studio. Calexico records there, Vodka. I think for the reason it is analog, and it has got a really cool vibe. And there's like a whole wall of keyboards. So our keyboard player was psyched. He had all kinds of different sounds to work with, and big wall of guitars and all kinds of cool stuff. So we were all like kids in a candy store. It was really fun.
Good. I mean, that's the best way to do it, if you'd asked me.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So that's a lot of good information about the album. Everyone's really stoked, I'm sure, myself included, for the release. Let's move on to the upcoming tour a little bit.
Yeah.
I know you're coming to Baltimore, obviously. That's one of the reasons that I'm interviewing you today, May 9th at Baltimore Soundstage. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, obviously you're kicking off the tour in Colorado, especially the big one at Red Rocks with Phil Lesh, which is an amazing opportunity for you guys. But coming out east is really what I want to talk to you about. Obviously, bluegrass tends to be thought of more as a mountains type of, genre. And obviously, Colorado specifically has an amazing scene for bluegrass. But what do you think is special about you've toured everywhere. What do you think is special about the East Coast bluegrass scene from your experience?
Well, that's where it came from. That's the source. And, the Baltimore, D.C. area, historically, was a big hotbed and still is, but especially back, in the day, back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, I should say, was definitely a big hotbed for bluegrass with the Seldom Scene and the Country Gentlemen and on and on and on. And of course, the Southeast and everything, but definitely the East Coast really is where a lot of bluegrass came from, in Appalachia and even the Northeast to a degree. I mean, New York and New Jersey had their share of bluegrass bands come out of there, like Country Cookin' and of course Bela Flex from New York and Pete Wernick and the East Coast is definitely a hotbed and definitely the source of a lot of great bluegrass. And it kind of filtered out west eventually. And because I was raised in Tennessee and then moved out to Colorado when I was a teenager, and I was around a lot of bluegrass in Tennessee. But when I moved to Colorado, I was exposed to festivals for the first time with the Telluride Bluegrass Festival and Rocky Grass, and then bands like Hot Rise and Newgrass Revival and such. But we were sort of a little later on this part of the country, as far as the bluegrass thing was concerned, and really largely it definitely started on the East Coast and spread from there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So we're excited to have you back out east. And so I'm not as much of a bluegrass historian, so I actually didn't know that it really started here. One thing though that I've always noticed is how much bluegrass is similar to the Irish jig. Funny enough, I've always made a connection to that, and sort of believe that that part of the world, has been around a lot longer than us, and maybe part of that mass immigration to the United States was sort of the beginning of bluegrass, in my opinion. But I don't know. I'm not big on the history of the genre.
You're absolutely right. That's where it came from. The Irish tradition, when the immigrants came to America, they brought their instruments, and that filtered into the Appalachian area and mixed with the locals and became old-timey and bluegrass and country music. And but even before that, you can trace it to Africa, which is where you can probably trace all music.
Right.
All modern music. Of course, there's classical music, which didn't come from Africa necessarily. But as far as rhythm and as far as, bluegrass, jazz, blues, it all came from Africa. And the banjo came from Africa. So that's an interesting tidbit. So that was actually originally an African instrument, and that was, I think, because there's banjo in Irish music, so that migrated to Ireland, and then that migrated to the United States, or to America. So it's pretty interesting. The only real American music we have is jazz and blues, which came from New Orleans, and ragtime and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But all that string band music, that that all came from Ireland and later on Appalachia. So
wow,
pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well that's wonderful information. I really appreciate delving into that with me. One thing I actually had a question when I told one of my good buddies that I was going to be talking with you. He had an interesting question that he wanted me to ask. Basically, you're known as one of the people that in large part have influenced the transition, and not necessarily away from traditional bluegrass, but to the popularity, I should say, of jamgrass or newgrass or a lot of those kind of subgenres that have come out of that. What is it that you think allowed for that to happen at the time that it did?
Well, and we were inspired by bands like Newgrass Revival, Sam Bush,
Mm-hmm.
Hot Rise, the Dirt Band to some degree. The Southern Scene had a big part in that. They were one of the first progressive bluegrass bands. The Osborne Brothers were one of the first bluegrass bands to have drums. And the thing was that kind of fell by the wayside. It was almost kind of like an experiment that didn't quite take, the bluegrass with drums thing. And I think we just kind of picked it back up. We picked the ball back up, and probably more by accident than design. We were playing bluegrass and playing festivals in the summertime and still working jobs, and it was very hard in the mid to late 80s, to play bluegrass other than at festivals. It was very hard to get gigs as a bluegrass band unless you were big, I think at that time, Hot Rise was doing pretty well touring, and Newgrass was doing pretty well touring, and bands like that. But largely, bluegrass bands were not working that much. It was pretty common to have a regular job, and in the summertime you play festivals. But the rest of the year, there wasn't a whole lot to do as a bluegrass band. So we just had this concept where we thought, well, if we just combine, because we all kind of played electric music too. I played electric guitar even before I played bluegrass, and we decided, well, what if we just threw together a band with drums and got out our electric instruments? And I had an electric mandolin, which I had just gotten at that time, and at that time we had an accordion player, and so it just seemed to make sense to combine bluegrass with rock, and especially with Cajun, which is Vince's big thing, because we had an accordion player, and so I started playing the fiddle so we could do more Cajun stuff, and it just started to happen. It was just it just took, and basically all we wanted to do was play ski areas in the wintertime and be able to make money doing that. That was pretty much it, and maybe play bigger venues around Colorado, and it just started to happen, and it just wasn't really anything we thought about. It was just an idea that, well, if we turn it up a little bit and get a drummer, then maybe we can get more gigs. And at first, people were like, "Wow, bluegrass drums, that's weird." And it definitely, took some people back, and the traditional bluegrass community wasn't too fond of it at first, although they've come to accept us more and more. And then there's been more and more bluegrass bands with drums, and so it just kind of happened. And it was a time when the jam band movement was just starting. There really were just a handful of jam bands. There was Fish was just starting out. They maybe had like 3 or 4 years on us. Panic was just starting out. Who else? A band called Chakra, who's no longer around. And it was just this way of getting out on the road without having a record deal, and getting in our case, getting in a school bus and traveling around the country playing gigs. And it just took. And before you know it, there's all kinds of other bands doing the same thing. Because it was kind of like a blueprint. It was a way to make a living that people really hadn't done before then. And suddenly it was like, oh, that's all you got to do is get a band and get on a school bus and travel around the country and play gigs. Cool, we're in. Yeah, and of course it's blossomed and exploded into what the jam band movement is today, which is hundreds of bands, I'm sure. But back when we were starting Leftover Salmon, we were pretty much the only bluegrass band with drums out there doing it, and it was exciting because we were blazing a trail that now obviously a lot of other bands have followed in our footsteps, and it's pretty cool. So it's really great to see what's happened with that. And we weren't, solely responsible for it, obviously, because we were just inspired by bands that came before us. But I think the timing of it was such that, the culture was ready, the environment was ripe for that to happen, and people were ready. And the Grateful Dead, we're basically obviously doing that already, but on a bigger scale, and we just kind of followed in their footsteps as well, even though we're not really a Dead cover band, but in the same kind of tradition. And then once they stopped, then there was a big void that a lot of bands jumped into.
Okay, great. Yeah, so let's get back to one more thing about Baltimore real quick, and then I'll cap it off with a couple of fun, quick questions. You talked about the history of Baltimore a little bit in bluegrass music. What about what's going on there? What excites you about what goes on there today? Obviously, in the last couple of years alone, I've seen you play at Charm City Bluegrass and Hot August in different facets, which are both great festivals. So what about this area that they're doing today is really exciting you?
Well, I'm not real familiar with the music scene going on there. I'm familiar with a band that used to play there called The Bridge, and I'd like to give a shout out to Kenny, who used to be in The Bridge, who sent me an electric mandolin about a year and a half ago that the guy who built my mandolin built, and he wasn't playing it, and it needed some work, so he sent that to me, and I got that all fixed up, and so I thought that was really cool. So that's the connection I have to the Baltimore music scene, is that band, The Bridge. And they were really, really good. And other than that, I don't really know a whole lot about that scene in as far as in the last few years. I do know that it's definitely blossomed. And the Charm City Festival is very cool. Really enjoyed playing that last year. Andy and I played it with Dan and Adam from Johnny Mountain String Band and had a really fun set. And so that's a very cool thing, a great development for that music scene for sure. But other than that, I'm not really that familiar with what's going on in Baltimore. We also were recently at the Ram's Head. We did a sit-down acoustic show at the Ram's Head in Indianapolis, and that is really cool. That's a really, really cool scene there, and a very cool little town. But yeah, I'm a bit at a loss as far as bands that are coming out of there. Not really sure, but I do know it's definitely been growing. Of course, in DC, the 930 Club is, really become a world class venue, as well as the Hamilton, and that's been a great place to play. It's definitely become more of a place on the map for touring bands. In the last few years, it's definitely become a place where you want to keep coming back to for sure.
Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, I was at that set last year at Charm City Bluegrass. That was a lot of fun.
That's
um,
cool. Huh?
yeah, I'm glad you guys had fun doing it. That festival's coming up this weekend actually for this year's
Oh,
rendition. So, um,
nice.
okay, well, great. So here we'll close it out with a couple of quick fun ones. Who's your favorite living mandolin player?
My favorite living mandolin player, of course, would be Sam Bush.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a pretty
But I got
wide
several
favorite.
others. I got several others that I really love. I really love Ronnie McCurdy's playing. He's one of my absolute favorites. And the cool thing about the mandolin world is that we're all close. All of us. All the prominent mandolin players know each other. Mainly, I mean, there's obviously a lot of traditional guys that maybe I don't know, but a lot of the super prominent ones, like Mike Marshall and David Chrisman. I've gotten to do a bunch of stuff with him, and so I would say my top three would be Sam, David, and Ronnie. Just to name, and of course Tim O'Brien was my mandolin teacher from way back, and so I love his playing. And of course, can't talk about mandolins without talking about Chris Healy, because he's like Mozart, and he's in a class all his own. But there's a lot of great mandolin players out there. Jake Jolliffe, who's been playing with the On the Mountain String Band, absolutely turn it up. Really, a really great player. But seems like about every other week I hear about somebody else who's emerged as like the new amazing mandolin player. Sierra Hall, incredible. she's killing it. Yeah, and answer your question, I'd probably have to go with Sam as my favorite.
Okay. And then lastly, if you could perform at one venue that you've never played before, what would it be?
The Gorge.
The Gorge. Nice. Very good choice. All right. Well, thank you so much, Drew. I really appreciate it. I won't take up any more of your time. Let you get some rest, and we'll see you at May 9th. On May 9th at Baltimore Soundstage, and Something Higher, the new Leftover Salmon album, comes out May 4th. Anything else you want to say before we head out?
I think we've covered it.
All right, awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed your time with me, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
My pleasure, man. You have a good one.
Thanks, Drew. You too.